Ezra Levant here for Rebel News. I'm in Midtown Toronto. Behind me, the charred remains of a major church in Canada, St. Anne's Anglican Church, a mighty church more than 100 years old, a massive edifice in this community, burnt to a crisp, a 4-alarm fire early yesterday morning. You can see fire crews are still here en masse, almost a dozen vehicles surrounding the place. Firefighters told me that the fire has burned out and now they're focused on pumping out the water from the basement. The water obviously used by them to put out the flames, but not before the building itself was completely burnt. Now, what's interesting is that this has received coverage in the mainstream media, which is not usual. There have been literally dozens of churches, many of them burnt to a crisp in Canada, that have been hit by a crime wave of arson in the last few years. In fact, if you add in other vandalism, more than 100 Canadian churches have been vandalized, smashed, or burnt in approximately 4 years. It's every other week. The fact that this one also had some famous paintings in it by the so-called Group of Seven, I think that's what made the mainstream media cover it. For example, let me quote to you the headline from the Globe and Mail. Look at this. Loss of historic St. Anne's Anglican Church in Toronto's catastrophe for Canadian architecture? Seriously, an entire article, and the bulk of it is how architecturally interesting it is, and there was some secular artwork in it. Could you imagine if a Jewish synagogue or a Sikh temple or a Muslim mosque had been torched? And the headline was, it was architecturally interesting, people. This is a real loss for architecture. Unthinkable. Now, I should say that we don't yet know conclusively the cause of the fire. I spoke to 2 firefighters who said it's still under investigation, and yet every news article I've read, and public statements too, such as this one from the CBC, say they rule out arson. How can you rule out arson if the investigation is ongoing? Would they prejudge a fire at a mosque that way? Of course not. Justin Trudeau would have an emergency national press conference using his best substitute drama teacher voice. But this is just a Christian church, so who cares? The Prime Minister has not been motivated to put out a statement, though it's burnt to a crisp. The fact that officials, or the official regime media, they're really one and the same, say it's not arson while the investigation is ongoing is reminiscent of the terrible fire that torched the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, France. Before the investigation, they announced it was not terrorism. Our friend Morrissey even made a song about it. Remember this?
Notre Dame, we will not be silent. Notre Dame, we will not be silent before any investigation. They said this is not terrorism.
Listen, it is possible that it wasn't arson, and it's also possible that if it was arson, it wasn't anti-Christian bigotry. This is Toronto. It's in a perpetual crime wave. Typically, the crime is stolen vehicles, not arson, but it might have just been mischief all around, including right across the street. Vandalism is everywhere. Graffiti, it's accepted as normal in Mayor Chow's Toronto. I can't just put the blame on her. The Premier of this Conservative province and the Prime Minister, they abide this as the new normal. It's interesting to me what does or does not get labeled a hate crime. Even hoaxes get this Prime Minister's attention. I don't know if you recall, a few years ago, a young lady said someone ran up to her with scissors to cut her hijab. It was so evidently a Jussie Smollett-style hoax, but the Prime Minister tweeted about it, and the tweet remains even though it's debunked. I don't know if this is a hate crime or just a regular crime. I do know the silence of officialdom is echoing. The worst that they're concerned about is the architectural catastrophe. I shouldn't say that Justin Trudeau had nothing to say about this. A few years ago, His senior advisor, Gerald Butts, when pressed about this crime wave of church arsons, said it was, quote, understandable.
As I've also said, it is unacceptable and wrong that acts of vandalism and arson are being seen across the country, including against Catholic churches. One of my reflections is I understand the anger that's out there against the federal government, against institutions like the Catholic Church. It is real and it is fully understandable given the shameful history that we're all becoming more and more aware of.
It was understandable. I mean, not that he condoned it or approved it, he just understood why people would torch churches. This, of course, because like Trudeau, Butts himself has a loathing for Christianity. He participates in the defamation that the church was responsible for a genocide of Indigenous people. And who wouldn't understand torching a symbol of genocide? That's where we are under Justin Trudeau in Canada. We'll keep you posted on this story. It's very sad that an iconic church is torched. Yeah, there's architectural and art reasons for it, but when a house of worship is burned and no one in the regime gives a damn, I think that's a sign that your civilization is unhealthy. For Rebel News, I'm Ezra Levant.